It was a morning that began like any other, a pale spring light over gravel and pine, a trailer door left ajar, and the gentle hum of a small Nova Scotia community carrying on its quiet business. By the time the sun climbed higher, 2 small lives had vanished into the kind of silence that turns a neighborhood into a question. 6-year-old Lilly Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother, Jack, were gone. The ordinary choreography of breakfast and backpacks and the familiar routes children take to play had been interrupted by an absence so complete it felt impossible to measure. That absence is the shape of this story. On May 2nd, a routine check by their mother found only an empty space where 2 small bodies should have been. A call followed. Officers arrived at the family's trailer around 10:27 a.m., and the response that day and in the days that followed was urgent, exhaustive, and, eventually, baffled by its own lack of resolution. Dozens of officers and volunteers, K-9 units, drones and ground crews combed the fields, trails and waterways of Landone Station and the surrounding countryside. The community turned out as well. Neighbors, friends, strangers who pinned photos to trees and doors and windows because doing something felt like refusing to be swallowed by helplessness. Search teams scanned the canopy and the clearings. Drones hovered over the tree line like waiters at a terrible banquet. Trained dogs moved along scent lines where they could, and yet the first crucial days returned no verified sighting and no trace that stitched into a clear timeline. That raw, early emptiness, the sort that makes a small town hold its breath, is where the investigation began and, frustratingly, where it continued to circle. When a disappearance yields little physical evidence, the focus of detectives does what it must. It reconstructs. Investigators started to piece together the morning in meticulous detail. Phone records were pulled. Vehicles were examined. Witnesses were canvassed. People closest to the children, the mother, a stepfather who had been active in local forums, and the children's biological father who lived separately, were interviewed and, in some cases, submitted to screening tools investigators use to eliminate or narrow leads. Polygraph tests were administered days after the disappearance. The records released later indicate that several family members underwent those tests, and that, at least publicly, the examinations did not produce definitive incriminating results. That alone did not alleviate the scrutiny that shadows missing person inquiries. In a case defined by what is not known, even standard investigatory steps become magnified. It was the mundane, overlooked objects that early on took on outsized importance. A child's pink blanket was found on May 3rd, about a kilometer from the trailer, and later, another fragment of what appeared to be the same blanket was recovered from the family's own garbage bin. For many who followed the story, a blanket is the kind of ordinary possession that anchors the human drama. For investigators, those fragments are evidence to be tested, cataloged, and analyzed. For the public, however, the image of that pink cloth floating on the side of a rural road was a visual that refused to be simple. How did a familiar object travel from a trailer to a roadside and then back into a trash can? Was it connected? Was it staged? Could science tie those fragments together? Forensic work has been done, fibers examined, specialists consulted, but authorities have not publicly released conclusive DNA or trace evidence connecting the pieces in a way that resolves the central mystery. The sniffer dogs that were brought to the roadside location reportedly failed to pick up a scent trail there, a detail that raised as many questions as it answered. Another early lead came from a witness who told police she saw 2 children walking hand in hand toward an older woman standing near a gold or tan sedan with its rear door open. She described a boy with dirty blonde hair and a girl with dark pigtails. At first, that account read like a breakthrough. A sighting, a possible vehicle, a person who might have been waiting. Then the human fallibility of memory intruded. The same witness later said the children she saw might have been older, perhaps 9 and 7, numbers that do not align with Lilly and Jack. Investigators logged the statement and treated it seriously, but it did not converge into a confirmed lead. Witness testimony is an essential thread for detectives, yet it is a thread that can fray and shift under the weight of time and stress and the ordinary unreliability of recollection. Officially, the RCMP has been careful with public language. In statements issued over the weeks and months following the disappearance, they have emphasized that the case remains open and active and that multiple units, major crimes, specialized forensics, digital teams are involved. They have repeatedly said there have been no verified sightings of Lilly or Jack since that morning in May, and that no one has been publicly named as a suspect. Behind those measured statements, however, the public record released in heavily redacted court filings reveals a sprawling and methodical inquiry. Search warrants, affidavits, and investigator notes ran to more than 100 pages when portions were made public. They show detectives combing through phone data, bank transactions, and social media messages belonging to several family members. They show surveillance footage being gathered from gas stations, private cameras, and intersections within a 30-kilometer radius. They show officers returning to properties that were part of the initial sweep to take more photographs and collect items that at first glance may have seemed ordinary. The friction between the need for careful, legally defensible investigation and the public's appetite for answers has been visible and painful. Redactions, those necessary black marks that protect the integrity of ongoing work, have instead become a source of suspicion for many residents and observers who want clarity now. Online discussion boards dedicated to the case have become noisy places where theories are exchanged and trust is tested. The community's reaction has not been limited to speculation. It has been energetic and practical. Vigils continue. Posters are refreshed. Volunteers distribute flyers at local shops and gas stations. People who once waved hello now study the lane for the sound of a new vehicle. The rhythm of life has acquired a distinct cadence of waiting. Time is an adversary in cases like this. Investigators speak openly about the problem that every passing hour compounds. Evidence breaks down, memories become less precise, and potential witnesses are more likely to second-guess what they thought they saw. The crucial window of the first 48 hours had passed when many felt the effort should have yielded more. Yet detectives have not let the calendar deter them. The documents indicate repeated re-examinations of physical evidence and digital data and the reopening of interviews, sometimes under different circumstances, to coax out details that may have been overlooked in the initial rush. Forensic tests, including digital forensics and soil analyses from areas once searched, have been reported as ongoing months later. The persistence of that procedural work is both modest and monumental. It produces no immediate headlines, but it is the kind of careful labor that, when a case is resolved, often proves decisive. There are legal realities that shape the hunt. Former investigators and legal experts point to an uncomfortable truth for families and communities. Missing person inquiries without clear evidence of a crime can hit procedural limits. Police cannot, without cause, conduct invasive searches or detain people. Forensic testing requires probable cause, and courts must balance investigative needs with civil liberties. Those guardrails are structural and essential, and they can feel obstructive in the face of grief. The result is that some searches stall not from a lack of effort but because the puzzle lacks the necessary pieces to justify certain legal steps. That is why some experts caution against equating procedural conservatism with indifference. Still, there are moments in the slow work that provide cautious hope. Authorities have rechecked surveillance footage from towns and intersections that were not thoroughly examined at first. Cameras on longer stretches of highway have been reviewed with fresh eyes. Officers have revisited homes and storage areas connected to relatives, photographing and collecting items that, under new hypotheses, might become relevant. In investigation, sometimes a single unremarkable detail, a dashcam recording, a muffled ringtone captured on a phone, a card Gable purchase, can reframe the entire timeline. It is precisely the possibility of such a pivot that keeps detectives and volunteers engaged. For the family, the public view has been complicated and raw. The mother's social media accounts grew quiet. Requests for interviews were declined. That withdrawal is understandable. Grief and legal counsel often push families out of public view at a time when every question from a journalist or an online critic can feel intolerable. At the same time, the public documents showed investigators comparing public statements and posts to digital records and witness statements, and in some instances those timelines did not line up perfectly. Mismatches do not automatically imply malice or wrongdoing. People under pressure tell different versions of events for a host of reasons, But when physical evidence is scarce, inconsistencies become items to be checked and rechecked. Community members who have lived through days and months of searching speak of an emotional geography that has shifted. Landowned station, a place where neighbors know each other's rhythms, suddenly feels suspended. Parents who once let their children roam farther are beset by new cautions. The disappearance has traveled beyond county lines. National advocacy groups for missing children offered assistance, guiding media coordination and drawing attention to the case on a wider stage. That attention brings resources but also scrutiny. For families who are already exhausted, it can feel like both a lifeline and a pressure. One of the most painful truths of this story is the particular kind of grief that accompanies an unresolved disappearance. There is no neat closure, no funeral rites that confirm an end. Instead, there is a liminal space, a waiting that lacks answers. Relatives and friends sustain rituals. Candlelit vigils with names whispered into the dark, posters replaced when they weather, volunteers making door-to-door checks because continuing to search feels like a refusal of surrender. Those rituals are human acts of faith, acts that insist on presence in the face of absence. Investigators continue to look for any thread they can verify and corroborate. That work is painstaking and often prosaic. Digital forensics comb through logs and pings for the faintest hiccup that might place a vehicle or a person at a precise time. Soil samples are examined with patience and care because a microscopic match can be a fulcrum for new lines of inquiry. Surveillance footage is sometimes the slow work of watching the same frames again and again to catch a passing vehicle that was not noticed before. The hope rests on the possibility that a minor detail, a license plate fragment, a timestamp transaction, an offhand recollection that hardens into certainty, might emerge and tie together pieces that now feel scattered. No arrests have been made. No confirmed sightings have been publicly validated. The RCMP maintains that the case remains open and that its teams continue to review every tip and every statement. Those public assurances are more than boilerplate. They reflect an institutional persistence to follow leads within legal bounds and to hold forensic results until they are robust enough to support further action. For families and community members, those words are both comfort and an uneven consolation. They promise continuity of effort but do not substitute for the concrete answers people hunger for. There are, of course, dangerous traps when a community fills the gaps left by official silence with online speculation. Social media, forums, and comment threads can amplify misinformation, and in high-emotion cases that can cause real harm to investigations, to the reputations of innocents, and to the emotional well-being of those closest to the missing. Detectives urge caution not as a form of control but as a practical measure to protect the integrity of evidence and to preserve avenues that may still lead to resolution. The line between civic vigilance and harmful rumor is sometimes thin, and maintaining that line requires collective restraint. And yet the simplest acts of vigilance keep the story alive. Volunteers who hand out flyers in grocery stores or pin posters to telephone poles are performing a form of civic memory. Each refreshed poster is a small refusal to let two small faces slip from public view. Each vigil is a communal insistence that the absence be noticed and recorded. Those acts sustain both hope and pressure. They remind officials, nightly and morning by morning, that the missing are not forgotten. What might change the course of this case is impossible to predict. Investigations sometimes turn on the most unanticipated fragment. A pawnshop transaction, a camera that gets reprocessed, a witness who finally remembers an overlooked detail. Advances in forensic science, better DNA analysis on degraded samples, new ways to analyze fibers or soil, can also transform cold threads into compelling leads. For now, hope is procedural as well as emotional. It is the belief that continued, methodical work can generate the elusive connective tissue. This story also holds a larger lesson about the texture of modern investigations. In an age where so much of life leaves a digital trace, the absence of conclusive digital evidence can be as confounding as the absence of physical traces. Phone pings, social media timestamps, and surveillance cameras create lattices of data that investigators must interpret. When those lattices are thin or incomplete, the work of reconstructing a morning becomes more like archaeology than police procedure, sifting through layers, redating artifacts, and trying to assemble a narrative from fragments. Still, amid the procedural detail, the human core remains: a mother, a family, and two small children who should be playing in backyards or skipping along a sidewalk. The small items, a pink blanket, a worn shoe, a faded poster, are not props for a story, they are the material evidence of real lives. The community's fatigue and persistence coexist. People who once greeted the days with ordinary certainties now carry a quieter vigilance, waking again to the same question: where are Lilly and Jack? The RCMP's commitment, repeated in public briefings, is the institutional echo of what a community sustains privately. Investigators say they are still following leads, reviewing every tip and re-examining every piece of evidence. The language is precise and cautious, because law and procedure demand it. But behind the redactions and the lab reports is a human calculus, the same combination of method, patience, and hope that animates the volunteers who continue to distribute flyers, the neighbors who attend vigils, and the parents who watch their own children with a new tenderness. This account is not a tale of answers. It is a document of the search and of the stubborn, difficult work that continues when clarity is absent. It is also a reminder that unresolved disappearances do not simply evaporate from memory. They reshape communities, alter routines, and ask difficult questions about safety and visibility in places where life once felt secure. For now, Nova Scotia waits. The investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack continues in labs, in footage rooms, and on the ground. The hope that something, a test result, a recovered recording, a newly remembered sighting, will eventually reframe the case is the reason search teams persist and the reason families keep vigil. Until that day, the posters remain pinned to telephone poles, the community holds its breath in private and public, and the small town that once moved through its days in a comfortable rhythm keeps watch, insisting that two small lives not be forgotten. If this story has a through line, it is not mystery for its own sake. It is the sameness of human attachment, the unwillingness to let absence be the last word on a life. That refusal, in labs and on porches, under redactions and around candlelight, sustains the search. And because that refusal lives in so many hands, there remains, even now, a fragile promise that no avenue will be left untried and that the hope for answers will continue until the evidence, at last, yields a path forward.